Gugamops Savuziyavrahigas Sazorgfu. We connect to the energy. Gugamops Savuziyavrahigas Sazorgfu. We connect to the legacy. Gugamops Zvosiziyev Rahigas Szorgfu. We connect to the memory of those that were, those that are, and those are to come. Tau, Noon, Sade, Bait, Hay, not sure what that stands for. I knew at some point, I think. But we are in Passover 2024, and a lot of things have passed us over in the past year. And regardless of what is said about the historicity of the event, it's certainly very thematically powerful and useful for us. By more precise translations of some of the material, we end up fixing some of what are considered to be errors in tradition, because errors in tradition tend to be of understanding. And it is said that this might be the year that during Passover they initiate what is the sixth temple period. Some people are going to say the third, and I'm not sure how that comes about, right? Because if the tent in the wilderness fit the definition of a temple, and then there was the Solomon temple, and then the temple when they returned from Babylonian exile, and then the Maccabee temple period, and the Bar Kokhba temple period. This is like a Chinese, game of squares or something, right? Favorite game, or possibly from Chinese. Remember a lot of the references in the prayers and in Tanakh itself are towards the end of, there's a joining, there's a taming. So it's not just the ancestry. People talk about how the Khazaria kingdom sprung forth, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic and all that. Well, not all groups of Jews, but certainly some of them. It doesn't matter. Just like we read in Tanakh, that it wasn't all just purely the descendants of those who left with Moses. It was the people who joined the movement as time went on. Now, there's certainly the very valid role of not joining with the Gawim to give it a more Aramaic pronunciation, biblical Hebrew, as people call it. You have that suffix of a calf. You have the suffix, which means subdued or under control or whatever. So you surrender to the spiritual path, what God wants, etc., etc. And when it comes to that too, some people, particularly if they're Jewish, looking at this thing here, you say, yeah, well, it says don't use it in vain, don't use the name in secular use. So you can really say it all you want, but you just have to be careful with it. You don't use it in swearing and all that stuff. And one will recognize some names, but not necessarily that these names are the people that we know by the first and our last name that is mentioned. When you perform the rituals, for example, Natan ben Mikal, so it's important to know your name in these characters, whether you're using the 22 block letters or some version of what comes up to approaching 30 letters. And there is that double thing. So they had a version of that. People call it crater nowadays to give it an English title. But, because there's, of course, meaning associated with all that stuff. So the Passover kind of commemorates what went on in ancient Egypt between Mahwas, Nakandajits, and Rakanwer. Difficult word to say, right? So you had the summer solstice, the little heat, and the great heat, which were all about a month on, a month on, a month on. And Moshe had his, or Musa as it would have been pronounced in the ancient Egyptian, out of water, had his interaction with the festival that would have been a morning festival. So it was in the morning, and the ancient Egyptians had different words for magic, depending on whether it was internal or external. And the internal was the sahar, and the external was the sihr, which it's important to consider the directions, just like the right-hand path and the left-hand path stuff. And the argument, the Jerusalem Talmud versus the Babylonian Talmud, and they're both interesting things to consider, right? Because, one is more purely upon the doctrine of, the traditions of the Israelites themselves. The Babylonian Talmud would connect to, it would connect to some of the stuff in Babylon and stuff too. So it wasn't as pure in its conveyal of the tradition. And I like to come here once a year, even though I've fully went over them in other videos, because there's some new graves. There's some difference in the energy, because I have that cemetery over there to complete, but I like the feel of this cemetery better, and I'm not sure what that means right there. Some sort of prayer, but it's very common. In some areas they have that or the other. I did not recognize at first what was going on with some of what was there, because there was some obscuring in the Zoom video or something. That, and some people don't recognize Aramaic, so it's what is this stuff? And it's it's the script that's closer to the time of Moshe. Definitely not a Christian. I definitely don't know the it's like the Messianic stuff. It's nothing in Tanakh, nothing in the Talmud or Mishnah or anything like that indicates the sort of theology that people would be turning to, in considering Christianity the thing. So that's definitely not the thing. So, okay. So Moses cast his staff. Moses gave forth at least 9 signs. The 10th one, people say, isn't quite literal. But they would have fed the eldest more. So there would have been a higher die-out among the eldest. And also, if there was some sort of gas-related phenomenon, there again would have been more people who died among the eldest, because the elder son would have had, the gas that rose from the ground. More of that would have pulled up where he was at. And always carry the brush around. If you want to clean off a grave here. I tried to interview a Howard Bloom. It's like, things don't have to be political. Thank you very much. I'm not taking sides based on mere politics. But I definitely like the idea of you establish a state based on righteousness, based on whatever you think is your actual religious principles, rather than, just let the rich people vote on it like in most countries, right? And I guess what I heard in coming here is related more to that. The halal principle, hallelujah, we can relate to that rose. And we can talk about Daniel and all that. But, there was never this idea, the whole Messiah thing. There was never any, there's only going to be one Messiah ever and all that other stuff like Christians say. They've twisted things. Omniwall, if you're really saying this being is omniwall, all those things ending in all or yah, well, they're belonging to God, so there's a secondary quality. At most, you could say an individual is an angel or something, but you can't say they're a god or a part god. Hasha Hikra Asht Chil Athrat Bala Zut Part Kenya Wubni Bunya Chia But Rub Al Azar. So see, you find out about their other names here. Nazlud La Luch Nisan, so born around, April, March starts that month. Napthura Cha Luch Ab Shnut Tusher. I'm not going to read all. I guess there's a couple. Knurut Ab Asher Nupshu Dubka Buth Shup Chatu Washer Yazkur Bad Thashyas Zudrukyas Hath Zabim Sahishrim Aprim Alihu Bun Shral Shmaun Nulud Ka Luch Shabuth Napthur Luch Kaslu Shunt Tushwa. And sometimes you have the Hebrew year indicated in some of this, and the tribe of Judah tends to be, even in pseudo-ancestries, represented more than the other tribes, more than the share when it comes to the Levites and the Kohanim in particular. because that was supposed to be of a particular family of them. And yeah, don't play golf in the graveyard. I feel something right there. And some things have been lost as far as the evidence of this cemetery, and that happens. And so one thing about the Feast of Unleavened Bread is that the ancient Egyptians had this formula. They would use kamut, and this kamut was, it was, I think, the best type of wheat. And they would use this, handful of honey with this double fistful or a couple of them of flour. And they would put a smaller amount in the palm of oil, and that was the recipe for the bread. And this was an unleavened bread, and the ancient Egyptians would have, particularly in the summertime, as we call in the West, from the solstice to the equinox, and of course the final plague with the inundation of the Nile in September. And so all that is represented. There's other parallels and other traditions, but that doesn't mean that the things didn't literally happen themselves. Certainly some of it we know could have. And myth isn't entirely about that anyways. Myth is about meaning and a purpose. So if it's connecting the community, if it's giving us a sacred meal, it's giving us a stimulus of doing or not doing some things, then, all the better. Now, you do want to refine and try to find your truth and your meaning and your intentions of devotion and all that are appropriate. But these things even work beyond, they work beyond even the spiritual thing. But it's supposed to be spiritual. That's the difference between ideology and the other, is that you have you involve the spiritual side. So when people speak about people having ideology, they're trying to act like people's religions don't count. And certainly military service has a power in it too. Now, you can go back later and maybe believe something different about this service. And I am going more into the Ashkenazi prayers and stuff like this to release in the next, next year. This I'm intend to release on in Hanukkah. He was like, "Where's your Passover walk? It's Hanukkah, man." I was like, well, you can talk about things at any time. And like the pillar of light and the pillar of darkness. Well, wasn't that something along the lines of it depended on who, right? It depended on what side you were on, how this was being used. And thou shalt not make any graven images. It's not whether they're worshipped or not. That's, it's actually a separate commandment. Now, the original writing, you didn't have the letter A like we have it. Not even Aleph there. You had an ox head. And so definitely you drew things, but you weren't imitating the nature. That was just how you wrote the language. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs too. But then again, the hieroglyphs tended to include things. They tended to draw their so-called deities and kings and stuff like this. But just because something's treated as a deity doesn't mean it is a deity. And, to iterate, we don't have anything that we can look there. The owl is related to the strong leader. You got an ox and a goad, and that pulls along. You have the yah, something comes into a house. And so, and it's, today's form is four-sided and all that. So you have ideas here, and these ideas are, articulated. So this language in particular is very open to multiple meanings. And I feel like there's more time spent on this side of the cemetery here. That's an interesting name. And yeah, as I said, I like to have some mention of the new graves. I'm not always going to read them all off, but I definitely notice some of them. I've talked more about other things elsewhere, so I'm not necessarily going to give you a lecture on Passover or whatever in a more, traditional format, particularly with all the blessings and stuff, but some of those seders and stuff can vary as the time goes on. Gvops Svo Szi Yv Rahi Gus Szorg Fu. We connect to the memory. Gvops Zvo Szi Yv Rahi Gus Szorg Fu. We connect to the legacy. Gvops Zvo Szi Yv Rahi Gus Szorg Fu. We connect to the energy of those that were, those that are, and those that are to come. And let us remember that there never was one Judaism. There was always a variety of beliefs and practices, not quite as much as some other paths, and that the Messiah comes through a community building up in its righteousness. Gvops Zvo Szi Yv Rahi Gus Szorg Fu. It comes by principle and devotion, not a vicarious savior sort of way. Gvops Zvo Szi Yv Rahi Gus Szorg Fu. Certainly, God brings miracles that we can't do, but we need to do our part. Gvops Zvo Szi Yv Rahi Gus Szorg Fu.